Hello and welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jim and Sean.
Hello and welcome to Shauns Take. I'm Jim Galante. He is Sean Gold. Sean, how are we doing? Are you in mourning now with the season finally over?
You know, Jim, I am. It's one of the sad times of year, and it's funny because you get hit with the end of college football, and then all of a sudden the NFL is going to end in a couple weeks as well, and it's just such an exciting time of year. But I always hate the day after. Day after national championship game, day after the Super Bowl are two of my least favorite days of the year. I just know it's almost 5-6 months until I get to watch football again, and it's a hard time, but it's also an exciting time.
Well, I'm getting back to college. I've got to apologize to you. I talked you out of Miami last week into Indiana. I was ready to say I stand by my pick, which is a dumb thing to say since they didn't cover the spread. But I thought, they had every opportunity there to get that last score, get it over. The spread was not to be. I do still think Indiana easily the best team in the country. Credit to Miami for playing well. How in the world did they lose to Louisville and SMU?
That's just what I'll never understand with a lot of college football teams. It's like you play that well. I mean, Miami had chances to win that game too. And if watching the game, if you were like, hey, they ended up winning, it'd be like, yeah, I could see it. Like they deserve to be there. And it's just crazy that these regular season losses that teams stack up against far inferior opponents like Miami did with Louisville and SMU. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's is it just a bad week of practice that translates over? Do you not show up with adrenaline on game day? I'll never understand what the reason is for dropping games that should really be a gimme to a program.
Well, sometimes I think it takes teams a while to just get it together. A year ago, Ohio State, national champions, lost 2 games in the regular season, but by the time they hit the playoffs, they were a juggernaut.
Yeah,
they weren't going to be beaten, and they played really well. Now, Indiana pretty much played well throughout the year, but they hit another gear through the playoffs. But I also think Miami, end of the year, they probably were the second best team in the country.
Completely. And, I not to segment over to this, but you talked, we want to talk about some lessons learned this year. I think one big one for me is that the 12-team format really does work. And, you go back to last year, you just mentioned Ohio State. They wouldn't have been a playoff team if it was a 4-team playoff still. They would not have been in last year. Miami would not have been in this year. And look at who the best team was last year and the second best team was this year, are 2 teams that just would not have gotten in if we weren't in a 12-team format. So I'm it's made me a full believer that this is a system that truly works. And, expanding the playoff is a great thing for college football, where a lot of people, when it went to 12, they're like, this is going to be a lot of meaningless football. That's wrong, because we've seen back-to-back years, 2 teams that wouldn't have been in the playoffs get all the way to the national championship game.
Do you know what, Sean, I'm glad you brought it up, because that is in my notes that we did learn that. When we first expanded from the 4 teams, I thought 8 teams was the right number. You would definitely get it in. I was okay with 12, but I thought 8 was the right number. Now, to be honest with you, there's talk, and we still haven't found out yet, of going from 12 to 16. I actually now believe that 16 is the right number. When you have, these teams with a couple losses like Miami, Ohio State a year ago, I have not the few blowout games that happen, like James Madison and Tulane that we saw. Some people think that should be our lesson, that it should be less than 12. Well, if that's how you feel about a blowout game, then I guess Alabama didn't deserve to be there either, because they got blown out, and Oregon got blown out by, for the second year in a row, by the way. Yep. So don't use a blowout as your judgment on a team that, they should have never made it this far. One other thing I'd like to just mention again with the finals between Indiana and Miami, and this always sounds like coach speak. In any close game, there's 4 or 5 plays that are the difference in the game, and they're mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are the obvious, the turnovers, but you saw this. I think if you're Miami, you got to walk away from that game saying the third down penalties, that's allowing a possession to continue. And again, the blocked punt, one of the safeties in back, that was the worst effort I've ever seen in my life in blocking. Now, I don't know if he had in his head he wants to be more conscious of anyone's coming up the middle. If there's 2 guys, you block the inside guy. Well, there
Mm-hmm.
was no inside guy,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that was his mindset or what, but that was the worst effort I've ever seen trying to block.
I completely agree. That right there was the moment where it's like Indiana won the game because of that play right there. Like maybe the punt would have been good and Indiana would have driven down in 4 plays and scored a touchdown and it's the same score at the end of the day. But Miami's defense was playing really well. Indiana wasn't moving the ball as well as we've seen them move it all season long, and you give that up. So to me too, everyone wants to point, oh, Carson Beck throws an interception on what could have been a game-winning drive. You know what? Yeah, that hurt them too. But they may have never needed to be in the position to go down and get a game-winning
Right.
drive. That blocked punt right there did not happen. And you mentioned it too, the penalties too. That's always going to kill you, especially on third down. You're just shooting yourself in the foot at that point.
The other thing, just to mention, to balance it out, the other side too, Indiana's last possession where they had a 2nd and 1, get a first down, the game's pretty much over. And their offensive lineman flinches, 5-yard penalty. And Miami had the time to get down the field. Had they gotten down the field and scored, Indiana would have to look at that minor penalty as what caused the problem. So you don't know which one it's going to be, but usually there's mistakes in a game that change it. All right, let's get back to our lessons learned. You hit on, I think the 12-team playoff at least is the right way to go. Here's another, and maybe these two kind of tie into each other. I think we're slow to react in college football because it was so static. Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, they're your best teams. Didn't matter what else was going on. That was the case. So when Alabama played Indiana, undefeated Indiana, #1 Indiana, winner of the Big Ten, conqueror of Ohio State, and they play Alabama, I know Indiana was the favorite, but I think if you talk to the majority of people, they still thought Alabama was going to win the game. Maybe we should be a little quicker to update our opinions on teams.
I think you're 100% right about that. And I think not only did we see that with Indiana this year, I think we saw it with Ohio State too, because looking back at it, we were going off of what Ohio State did to end last season. But Ohio State, to me, there was not many games or instances where they were overly impressive this year. They played a pretty easy schedule all regular season, and then they go in and they lose to Miami. And they lost to Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. I think it was 13-10, or like that offense could only put up 10 points on your biggest stage with all the weapons you have. So I think Ohio State was even giving us signals that, yeah, we're ranked #1 because we're not playing anyone who we're really going to lose to. And we won it last year. So you're not going to drop us for having an undefeated season heading into a Big Ten championship game. But I think we were slow to react to just Ohio State not being anywhere close to what they were the year before. And like, I was always an advocate for them saying, whatever, when they have a meaningful game, they're going to show we're superior. And they didn't have one moment against a good opponent where they looked like the better team on the field. And so I think I was for sure slow to react to, hey, Ohio State didn't even look good against inferior opponents, but I still just trusted them because of what they did at the end of last year in the playoffs. And, that was another moment where should have seen the writing on the wall that Ohio State was not the best team in the country at any point really this season.
And I think you're right. It's that carryover from the previous year. Here's another lesson I think that we all learned. The Big Ten has surpassed the Southeast Conference. The Southeast Conference just is not as good as we thought. And towards that end, where everybody thought that way, they had 5 teams, Sean, 5 teams make the playoffs.
Mm.
They were still being treated like the number one power. But if you look at this, is 3 years in a row. Big Ten had the national champion. Southeast Conference didn't even have a team play in the national championship game 3 years running. I mentioned this previously on a show. The only win that a Southeast Conference team had in the 12-team playoffs was Ole Miss over Tulane, other than when they played each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the overall bowl games, they had a terrible record. I think they were like 4-10 or something crazy like that. So, have we reached the point where SEC, they are just not who we thought they were?
I think that we haven't, I'm sure there's a lot of people who would still disagree with it, but I don't know how you can, at least for this past season, say that the SEC was better than the Big Ten. The Big Ten, clearly they had the best team in the country, and I think Oregon and Ohio State would have been favored over a lot of SEC teams if they played each other. It's going to be interesting the next couple years. I'm sure. Would I be shocked if it flipped back and forth? Not at all. But for the time being, right now, I think it's hard to say that, this past season and heading into next season, the Big Ten's not the superior conference.
All right, here's the $1 million question, Sean. Why?
That's a great question. I think to me, it honestly comes down to the Big Ten just plays better defense. And I think the SEC, the SEC, I would look at them as a faster conference, a flashier conference, a more high-powered offensive conference. Like we see the Ole Miss games, right? Every Ole Miss, Georgia, 38-35. Like that's the exciting football. And then you see some more Big Ten games, which are lower scoring, more physical. But when you take physicality versus a flashy offense, I think we've seen a lot of times the physicality is going to push you through. And so I think right now the Big Ten is just more of a traditional hard-nosed football conference. And, the Georgia team hasn't been the same. Georgia used to have the speed and the high-powered offense while having a Big Ten defense that was just going to punch anybody in the mouth. And I just think SEC defense has taken a step back from what Georgia and Bama had during their national championship run. So I think the difference really is on the defensive side of the football. And not that Big Ten offenses are bad. Indiana and Ohio State have had some of the best offenses the past couple of years. Oregon's always going to be there. So I think that's a big part of it.
I'm going to go a little different direction on this. I think for the longest time, the Southeast Conference, they acquired talent in a way that, well, as I think it was Ed Orgeron, the money used to come in the back door. Now it's coming in the front door.
Yep.
And I think the Southeast Conference was better at the under the table payments. Now that playing field has been leveled, where the teams in the Big Ten, I'm not going to say it never happened in the Big Ten, but I think it was a lot less than it was in the Southeast Conference. The other part to it is, I think, just the more even distribution of talent because of the portal and NIL, where Alabama and Georgia don't have a monopoly on the talent.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a really good running back who's just behind an elite running back, well, you know what? Move on.
Yeah.
And, if you were a player who could start almost anywhere else, but your second team at one of those schools, heck, I could go get a bigger paycheck and go play somewhere else.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think that actually segments really well into one of my other lessons learned is that you can truly build a full transfer portal team and watch it succeed. And I think Texas Tech was the prime example of that. But we saw all the teams, have a lot of transfer additions. Miami, you bring in Carson back, that completely changed, how they were looking after Cam Ward was on his way out and didn't know who their starting quarterback was going to be the next year. But I think a lot of people, 2-3 years ago would have thought, yeah, go try to buy a whole new roster and see how the chemistry gels. And, these guys all have egos and they want to get paid and they're not going to mesh together. I mean, Texas Tech had a pretty darn good season with a full transfer portal team. So I think it shows how you truly can win through the transfer portal, even if your recruiting classes are not that strong.
I think that's a great point. It's a lot different. Remember, very recently we talked about Colorado trying to build their team, and we said, well, yeah, they may acquire more talent, but as you pointed, will they gel? I think also it's about with the portal. The other part to it is you are now. I use this analogy, Sean. Have you ever seen those articles? And we see it in professional sports, whether it's the NFL, NBA, um, even Major League Baseball. Let's do a redraft from 3 years ago, okay? And you see, wow, that was the player picked first in the draft, and second and third, and so wasn't picked to the third or fourth round. Well, in essence, what I think the transfer portal is a redraft.
Yeah.
But we now get to pick these guys with a lot more information. And so that's what Curt Cignetti did with Indiana. But the other part of it is, so he's got more information in the redraft, also known as the transfer portal, but he's also now bringing in 21 and 22 and 23-year-olds, not 19-year-olds. So they're also veteran, they're grown-up men.
I completely agree. I think it makes a huge difference. And, it's almost like from a coaching standpoint, would you rather be a great transfer portal recruiter or a great recruiter from a kid out of high school? And undoubtedly, you'd rather be a transfer portal recruiter because you can recruit an incredible recruiting class. But fact of the matter is, if these guys aren't playing their freshman, sophomore year, they're gone to another program where they can make a couple $100,000 at a, not your power schools, but like at a lesser Big Ten school, have a good year, and then jump ship and go to your upper tier Big Ten SEC school and just, get more playing time and more money along the way. So it really is. We're going to see teams prioritize how can we get somebody in the transfer portal who's shown 2 years of success at a smaller school versus I'm going to draft somebody out of high school, develop them, and then they're going to get their chance their senior year. Like, people aren't going to wait around for that anymore. And, I think there's a part where it's unfortunate, that's where we're at. But I also got to say, I completely understand from a player's perspective. You're telling me I get to be on the field and be the guy. Oh, and I get a nice paycheck at 17 years old. That's already going to be more than I might make after college. So I'll never fault somebody for that. And, most importantly, it's like, you want to be on the field. You want to be contributing. Development's a huge thing, but as a player, it's frustrating when you feel like you could be making an impact, but you just simply have to wait your turn because of who's ahead of you. So going and playing is always something that's going to be in a player's interest, I think.
And the final lesson, and I don't know if this is anything new, but I think it was even more magnified, is the value of the quarterback position, both up or down. If you would have going into this season had your choice of Fernando Mendoza or Arch Manning or Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier, Cade Klubnik, where does Mendoza fit on this in the pecking order?
Bottom of the list there.
Exactly. And this is where I don't know if Curt Cignetti was lucky. I don't think so, because this is back-to-back years. He brought in Curtis Rourke for hire year, and nobody else seemed to be knocking down Curtis Rourke's door or Mendoza's door to bring them in. And these guys have succeeded. So whether it's just his eye for talent or his ability to develop these guys, but you look elsewhere, the teams that disappointed, like Texas, like Penn State, like Clemson, like LSU, they had big-time quarterbacks who didn't do the job. Now, Sean, all we got to do is figure out how to predict which ones are going to succeed and which ones aren't.
Right. And it's going to be there. I'm sure we'll talk about this in future weeks, but we've had a lot of quarterbacks changing places already, and we'll see who is going to work out. Will you get the big name transfer who underperforms, or will you get a story like Indiana where all of a sudden you got the right guy and it can lead you to a national championship? And one thing I want to touch on, my last lesson learned falls kind of right in line with a lot that you were talking about. It is do not ever trust the preseason rankings, because they could not have been more wrong this year with how the top 10 looked, or really like the top 4 looked compared to the end of the season.
And that's a great one to finish on, Sean. And I will point out, despite that, guess what's been coming out this week? The way too early rankings. And guess what? They always look about the same, and we see the usual suspects. All right, Sean, as you said, that's something we could talk about in the coming weeks. I'm sure we will. Thank you, Sean. Thank all of you for watching. Make sure you join us again next week on Shauns Take.